right, so now we'll start the Q&A. Danny will answer any questions. If you have a question, if you could just raise your hand, I will come to you with the microphone and have you ask it. So we'll start with Chance.
Danny, when did you first realize you were going to be here tonight?
Yeah, that's not a true story, is it?
It's completely autobiographical.
I thought so. Could you tell that story you wouldn't tell me before about the Goodfellas screenplay?
What was I going to tell you about Goodfellas? The only thing that I can think of right now that I might have been going to talk about was that the original screenplay that I wrote for Groundhog Day began with a voiceover. It began in the middle with him waking up in the bed and breakfast already underway after a few weeks of this. So the first scene we see is like that third day scene where he knows what everybody's going to say before they say it, and he slugs the guy for no reason. That's where I opened. But it had a voiceover for Phil, and I had a twist ending for the movie too. At the very end, he wakes up with Rita just like this, and then a second later, Rita is out of there. She can't wait to leave. And it turns out that she's been reliving February 3rd over and over again. But the thing is, it switches over to her story at the very end as we're realizing that she's been repeating that day over and over again. There's a Rita voiceover. So the movie actually switches point of view from his voiceover to hers. The only time I'd ever seen that was in Goodfellas, where it had different people having a voiceover, and I did it first. Ha ha.
When you did it. I'm glad you did.
I love the movie that I wrote originally that, you know, had to grow to become this movie. I think it would have been great. But we don't know. And we'll never know, and this movie did, and that's okay by me.
What were we supposed to be looking for that you were going to tell us, but then...
Oh, it was a very small thing, but when after seeing the movie a gazillion times and thinking I'd seen everything in it and noticed everything about it, I was watching the scene where the old man dies, and you see his breath. You see that final breath coming into the air. So the two things are, I had never seen that before, I'd never noticed it, and I thought it was about the coolest thing I'd ever seen, to see a dying man's last breath, actually to be able to see it. But the thing that delighted me is I went back and looked at an early draft that I had written, and I'd written it into the script. So I had done that, but I'd forgotten about it, and Harold, the director, had taken it seriously and actually filmed it, and I thought it was just great. So.
Hi, I have 3 quick questions. The first one, does your original script exist anywhere that we could see the one before Egon started changing things?
I love you, whoever you are. The book is called How to Write Groundhog Day. And I used the original screenplay published completely with hyperlinks. So you're reading and you're going, wait a second, was this in the movie? And then I have a hyperlink saying, you might be thinking, now this was not in the movie. Here's what happened. Here's where it began. Here's how it moved along. And the entire book, the idea for it began because people kept writing to me and saying, I heard the original script is kind of different. I'd like to see it. And I thought, oh, I should just send it to that guy. I think I need an explanation. And I started adding annotations one after another, and about, 10 years later, here we are. E-books had come up, and it was like, finally, a book so you don't have to flip pages to look for your notes. And so I published it that way. And it's totally a coincidence that we're releasing it, that it just went online this morning. We had no way of knowing, but there you have it. So, thanks for asking howtowritegroundhogday.com.
Sure, no problem.
I've never sold anything before, so this is awkward, but howtowritegroundhogday.com. On Amazon, Kindle, and other ebooks near you.
Okay, never would have.
Was that your... Did you have more questions?
I do, yeah. I may be looking too deep into the movie, but after he spoke to Ned Ryerson and stepped in the puddle, and then after he was a jerk to the lady on the phone and got hit in the head with a shovel, were those two, I mean, assuming it's all a karmic movie, were those two like karma the universe warning him?
Yeah, exactly. When I saw the movie and saw the shovel hitting him in the head, I was worried that people might think that that had somehow caused something in his brain that caused this to happen. But I think people just sort of got that that was just a gag and it was funny and onward. But yeah, I mean, karmically we made him deserve everything that he got. He was the kind of person who invites that sort of.
And the third question was, what was the meaning to name him Phil as the same as the groundhog?
What do you think?
I'm asking you.
I asked you second.
Ask you first.
The way these things work is I had come up with the idea about this guy repeating a day over and over again, but then you have to figure out which day it is, right? So I'm looking at the calendar, so any holidays coming up? And I open the calendar and, 2 days later is Groundhog Day from when I got the idea. And I thought, that's a good idea. Now I have an idea not only for which day it is, but who this person is. He's someone who goes to a small town because that makes sense to me. He should be somewhere where he's not familiar with things. And otherwise, if he was in a big city in his home where there's tons to do, the idea of exhausting all possibilities doesn't work as well. It doesn't happen as quickly. So I knew he had to be from somewhere coming to a small town, and as soon as I'd chosen Groundhog Day, I was thinking, oh, okay, so he's a weatherman or a news reporter or something. He's going to cover the groundhog. That's perfect. What's his name? I don't know. Phil. The groundhog's name is Phil. Let's call him Phil. Somebody someday will be sitting in a movie theater and saying, I bet that's meaningful. It worked. I honestly don't know exactly what the resonance was, but the second it happened, I liked it. And I liked that him walking through town, as soon as people hear his name, they think it's funny because it's named after the groundhog. And then psychologically, he starts thinking, oh, I am Phil, and Phil is me, and the only way I can get out of this cruel existence is to kill Phil. Which he does, but it sort of doesn't work. So it might mean something.
So this is like the anniversary of when you started working. It's like today or tomorrow, right?
Pretty much. It was like a January 30th, way back when. I guess about 3 years before the movie came out, so 89, 90, right in there. Yeah, I've been living with this for a long time. Longer than you.
What was the thing that you wanted us to be looking for in the movie?
Oh, I just answered that. That was about the guy's breathing, seeing his last breath, seeing the old man's last breath. That was, I only mentioned it because it was something that I didn't notice till I'd seen it many times. I thought maybe somebody would enjoy looking for that. But then I realized I can't start talking about, well, when the old man dies. No! Don't tell me! So.
How active were you involved in the movie after your script?
What happened was, when they hire you to write when they hire you or they buy your script, they have to hire you to rewrite it because nobody just makes the movie the way it comes out ever. That's a Hollywood joke. I love it. Who can we get to rewrite it? You wonder why movies come out the way they do. It's because of that kind of thinking. So I was hired to do the first 2 rewrites. After I finished the first one with all the studio notes, kind of taking out the voiceover and straightening it out to be more of a studio-type comedy, they said, okay, now we want Harold to work on it, who's the director, and he's a writer. And he had written Animal House and Ghostbusters, and the guy in Stripes. He'd been around the block a few times. He knew what he was doing, and he was wanting to turn it into a Harold Ramis comedy. So he did his draft, and then the studio liked it, and they hired Bill Murray. And then Bill had some issues with the script, and so he and Harold were working on them, and they came to an impasse. And so the studio hired me back to do my second rewrite, and I worked with Bill Murray and turned the script back into what it had originally been. And then Harold got a little nervous because the studio had approved his draft, and so we started conferencing it together. So this was all in the last 3 weeks before production, and they're already building sets and asking us, is this scene in or out? And he and I worked on that together, and then I stayed on the set for the first week during production. And they invited me to stay on, but I had no purpose. The script was done. Harold and Bill do a lot of improvising. You do it on camera once, and then you do take two, and the third time it's going to be stale. It just isn't going to be funny. So they improvise just to keep it fresh. And Harold can write, so they didn't need me. I was anxious to get back home. I had a little baby. We had just moved from Los Angeles to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I felt like I needed to be there with my family, so I packed up at that point and went home. So I was there for a lot of the writing, on and off, and up until the end, and then the first week of shooting. And it was very cold, so it wasn't even fun to be there. Yes?
Okay.
Yes.
I have taught this movie several times, both to students at Concord High and just last fall to an adult class at the Osho Lifelong Learning Center. And when people ask me why I would teach Groundhog Day, I used to try to get a reaction by saying it was the most profound movie I know. And they'd say, what do you mean? And I'd say, well, this is a movie in which repeating Groundhog Day seems to me to be a metaphor for being stuck within your own ego. And you can only get out of that through loving and productive relationships with others. And I thought, I don't know of anything more profound that I've ever seen in a movie. I heard this time around, I need to ask you, this is a question. I've always been struck by how, for me, the meaning of the movie is contained in the line from the Walter Scott poem, "The wretch concentred all in self." But this is the first time in 15 or 20 viewings of it that I actually caught the last line of the French poem, which was "un peu chaque matin," which translates to "a little each morning." So that French poem must also be about repetition somehow?
La fille qui j'aimerai sera comme bon vin qui se bonifiera un peu chaque matin. The girl who I will love is like a good wine who grows a little bit mellower every year, each passing day.
Each day, each morning, okay.
And that seemed generally appropriate, and I also just happened to know it because it's from a song, and I learned French mostly by trying to sing French songs, and that's all I know. If you ask me for a cup of coffee or directions to the Louvre, you know, I can't do it unless I can sing it.
The other question I had was the wretch consented all in self, was that line yours in the screenplay?
Yeah, I found the poem from, Sir Walter Scott, just looking through a collection. It was short, it was about ego, and it was judgmental about ego.
Right.
And so it was her evaluation of him. And so it fit perfectly.
And
it seemed a little bit dark, but generally it fit very well. It was always about ego and the limitations of it, and it was always an experiment for me in change, in actual about a human being changing. And the question in my mind was, if a person could live long enough, would they change? Somebody who has trouble changing, maybe it's just because one lifetime isn't long enough. What if it were multiple lifetimes? Would that person ever change? Would they ever get outside of themselves? Mm-hmm. Would an egotistical person stop being that way, or is that, concentered all in self, condemned to dying that way? Is that it? So I did this experiment with someone living forever, and that's what I was thinking in my mind. That's what I was thinking about. And then I realized, well, as a movie, that's a very sloppy idea, because eternity is a long time, and a movie's only 90 minutes. And to have to cover all those different sets and times and places and throughout history to make your point would be very tedious. And that's when I got the idea that, but what if it happened all on the same day? Mm-hmm. So it was always about eternity. But this way, eternity can be experienced as a repetition of days, and that gives you a whole different sense of connection with people in how we experience our lives as being one day after another, as opposed to looking at a life in terms of how old you are, something like that.
And I thought I saw a mistake for the first time today. Buster is in the street waving the cops out of town in pursuit of the truck. But his car beats both the police and the van to the quarry. How could he manage to have done that?
Time travel.
Ah,
Weren't you paying attention? I was not responsible for any of the logistics of the film.
In the process of question about in the process of you doing this, there are so many great laugh lines, both verbal and physical. Like, what percentage of those did you initially put in, and how much was added by the actors?
The ones that you laughed at?
Yeah.
All of them were mine.
All right.
No, it is kind of funny. I saw, I went to a Writers Guild event where a bunch of us who had done good movies were being honored, and Nora Ephron was being honored for When Harry Met Sally. And for each of us, they showed a clip from our movie, and then we'd go up and say something. And they showed a clip from When Harry Met Sally. The first thing that she said was, "Thank God it was a line that I wrote." Because very often people will come up to me and they'll say, "That's the funniest movie ever. I love the line," and they'll quote some line. I'm like, Harold wrote that one. Yeah, Bill improvised that one. I take full credit for the concept, which makes every line funny. You know, it really was a setup kind of a thing. If it's not set up correctly, the lines don't pay off. And then it's just a choice of which ones. I enjoyed that you all liked my deja vu line. Check with the kitchen. You know, I'm not really a jokey joke comedian, so when I come up with things like that, I'm very proud of myself. What I teach my students, among other things, is that a lot of times the biggest laugh, the biggest most information you get is not from the line that's delivered, but from the reaction of somebody to that line. And some of the best laughs I was paying attention to actually this time were from somebody's look or somebody's expression in reaction to something that somebody does. That was all intended. That's how you write. That's how you write well, but you can't put your finger on it and say, oh, they laughed because of that line or because of this line. So I will say most of them are mine, several are Harold's, a handful are Bill's, and that's all great. It is the best part of collaboration. Again, my students starting out, they always ask me, how do you control it so that you get everything that you wrote actually gets made and they actually say the lines the way you wrote them? And the truth is, in the movie business, you kind of have to let go of that and embrace the good that comes from working in collaboration with really talented people. So they make your work look better and you make them look better, and it's all big happy family when it works. In this case, it worked.
Danny, quick question, a comment and then a question. First is, this film has gone from being what I thought was one of the most funny films, one of the funniest films I've seen, to one of the profoundest, and then today, watching it, I really appreciated it as a great love story. And so for that, I thank you. But Roger Ebert has written that he doesn't think that any other actor than Bill Murray could have carried the role of Phil. And I was wondering if you'd comment on that, whether you agree with that, and just what Bill brought to the role that you created.
I agree with you and Roger in how uniquely wonderful Bill was in this role. There were things in there like when he grabs the chubby man in the hallway and says, "Listen, pork chop," and I was thinking, Harold, that's a little mean. I don't know if this is the right thing that you want somebody to do. It seems a little over the top. And he says, "Don't worry, Bill can do this. He knows how to be charming and nasty at the same time." and he's absolutely right. I had not imagined that it would be a comedian in the role, and I tried to talk them out of it because I always felt that it was a good acting part. I wanted an actor who could play comedy, not a comedian. And they were only thinking of comedians, and at some point Bill was giving them some trouble, and they were saying, well, let's just get Chevy Chase to play the part. And I like Chevy Chase, but he cannot act. And I didn't, he would just do it too broad and silly and it wouldn't work. And I was very upset about that possibility. And when Bill was cast, most writers would have been very, very excited, and because it's a big star, yay, my movie's gonna have a big star in it, and like an idiot, my thing was, oh damn, they cast a comedian.
The best comedians are the best actors.
Well, this certainly proves that rule, and he rose to the challenge and has since gone on to do some really, really fine acting, and I think he considers this a turning point in his career, which makes me proud. The only other thing I'll say about that is the first person that came to my mind was Tom Hanks, and the studio agreed, and they asked him to be in it, and he said no. And after the movie came out, he saw Harold somewhere, and he told Harold, you know, it was a good idea that I said no, because everybody knows me as a nice guy. And so when I come out and play this nasty guy, they know that by the end of the movie I'm going to be the nice guy. And so it kind of spoils it. With Bill Murray, you never know what you're going to get. And that makes the movie work. So casting was very important, and I think he was uniquely qualified for that role.
All right, we're going to take one more question and then go into the auction, and then there'll be more time for questions. So is there a hand that I can see for the last question?
To me, it seems like there are some scenes missing from it. I haven't read your book, but for example, the snowball fight. I get the feeling there was an original scene where Phil gets hit with a snowball and says something like, "I'll wring your neck, you little shit." He doesn't get any points with Rita, and then he changes it. How much was missing?
In that case, none. In that case, this came out exactly the way it was written, which delighted me to no end. That moment that you mentioned, I could certainly imagine having been in there, and I think in a lot of comedies they would have made a point of making sure that was in there. I try and run away from formula, and I also like to give the audience a little bit more credit to sort of jump over and see that, you know, you don't need that beat in order to make this one work. If it had been shot, they could have taken it out, and as you see, you wind up with. In general, what's amazing is how much better things get when you cut. When my students, I assign an 8-page paper and they turn a script and they turn in 9 pages, I say, you can always make it better by cutting. I can't imagine a circumstance where you couldn't. And so it's a little depressing when you're writing, because you cut and you make it better, and then you cut more and you make it better, and the argument is if you wrote nothing at all, it would be as good as it. Okay, I guess there's an auction happening, and I'll be around afterwards to continue this delightful conversation.